Hey there, welcome to DIY Projects with Pete. Today we're going to build a concrete Lazy Susan. This is a fun and simple project, and if you can build this, you can also build a concrete coffee table or an end table. If you find this video helpful, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. All right, let's go ahead and get started.
The first step is to build the mold for the concrete. We'll start by making the circular base of the mold out of melamine. And to get a perfect circle, I like to drill a hole in a scrap piece of wood and then measure 10 inches, which is the radius of the circle for the Lazy Susan, and then drill another hole. Use a short screw to attach the compass we just made, and then use a pencil on the outer hole to create the circle. Use a jigsaw to cut out the circle, and then slowly rotate the board as you're cutting to make your way around the entire circle. Take your time for this process to ensure you stay on or near the line while cutting. Adjust the table saw to cut the sidewall strip for the mold. Since we want a 1-inch thick concrete Lazy Susan, we'll cut the strip to 1 3/4 inches wide. The extra 3/4 of an inch compensates for the base of the mold, which we'll attach the strip to. Wrap the side strip around the circular base of the mold and then attach it. Pre-drill and attach the strip using a screw about every 6 inches. Make sure the side strip sits flush with the base of the mold. Trim the end of the side strip so it butts up against the start. There might be a small gap where they connect, and you can use some clear packing tape to cover the gap. The next step is to cut a circle out of diamond mesh to use as reinforcement for the concrete. Since this is such a small table, it's not 100% necessary to use reinforcement, but I wanted to show you the process in case you decide to make a larger mold to build a concrete coffee table or patio table. I cut the mesh slightly smaller than the base of the mold to a diameter of 18 inches, so there's about an inch gap between the mesh and the side strip. Clean the mold with rubbing alcohol and then seal the edges with 100% silicone caulk. Remove excess silicone with a caulk tool to create a rounded edge. Make sure there is not any excess silicone in the mold. Next step is optional, but it's one way you can personalize concrete. I used a vinyl plotter to cut a decal out of vinyl and then stuck it to the bottom of the mold. I layered a few decals together so the decal was about 1/16 of an inch thick and reflected the design since we are using the reverse cast pouring technique. You could have a local sign maker create the stencils for you, or you could create handmade designs with a razor knife and stencil material.
All right, the mold is all complete, so now we get to move on to the fun part of pouring the concrete. The decal is in and we're ready to rock.
Pour the concrete mix into a 5-gallon bucket and then add water according to the instructions on the bag. I like to aim for about a peanut butter consistency in the concrete, and I like to use the Quikrete countertop mix because it's easy to work with and has small aggregate. The smaller aggregate is better for thin projects like this, and it's also a lot easier to get a nice finish with. Then pour some concrete into the mold. If you are using reinforcement, I'd recommend filling the mold slightly more than halfway before setting the mesh into place. Work it into the edges and vibrate the concrete to minimize air pockets. Add the reinforcement and then fill the rest of the mold. Use a straight board to screed off excess concrete using a back and forth sawing motion. Fill low spots, and you can use a trowel to help smooth out the surface. Then vibrate the concrete again. Now this is an important step that is going to help ensure the top doesn't have many air pockets in the surface. Vibrate the concrete by shaking the work surface or by using an orbital sander, rubber mallet, or reciprocating saw along the sides and underneath the mold. Double check to make sure the work surface is level so the concrete cures with an even thickness, and then let the concrete sit for about 24 to 48 hours before removing it from the mold. Start demolding the concrete by removing the screws from the side strip. The strip will pull right off. Then use some 220 grit or higher sandpaper to round over the undersides of the concrete. Flip the mold and remove the base piece. On bigger concrete projects, the mold typically pops right off, but sometimes it's a bit stubborn on smaller projects. You can use a hammer and chisel if this happens, and just make sure you don't touch the concrete with the chisel or apply pressure between the two. The mold will pop off and you can see the concrete top for the first time. It should be smooth with very few bug holes. I like to do a quick sanding of the underside and then use a high grit sandpaper along the top edges. You can either wet sand or dry sand. If you do have a few pinholes or bug holes, you can then fill them with a slurry mixture of cement and water. Let the slurry dry and then remove the excess with a Scotch pad. I'd recommend letting the concrete continue to cure a while longer before sealing. Then apply a water-based sealer using a lint-free rag. I like to dilute the sealer with about 1 part water to 2 parts sealer. Apply about 5 or 6 thin coats to the top and sides, and apply a couple coats to the bottom side as well. It dries quickly, and the process doesn't take long. Lastly, measure for the placement of the Lazy Susan. Attach the Lazy Susan to the bottom of the concrete. Use a clear adhesive for this process.
All right, thanks so much for tuning in to DIY Projects with Pete. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you found it helpful, please give us a thumbs up and subscribe. I want to give a quick shout out to healthrevolt.net. We got to use their kitchen for all of the filming and it worked out great. So thanks again and cheers from Montana.
I invite you to check out some of the other concrete DIY projects on this channel. Click on the left thumbnail to learn how to build an acid-stained concrete coffee table, and on the right thumbnail to learn how to make a concrete top for an accent table. Cheers and have a good one.